So, as can be seen in the previous example, uh, primary sources must be closely scrutinized, as well as secondary sources for that matter, in order to ensure validity and accuracy. For instance, it could be tempting to use a Pulitzer Prize winner as a source for historical information, but there could still be large bias or inaccuracy of reporting reasons relating to the individual. As for the questions of why and the how of history, a modern contemporary example can illustrate the difficulty of explaining cause and effect. Take the Iraq War, for instance. Why did the Americans invade Iraq? Was it for weapons of mass destruction, or was it for oil? No evidence was found for the former. But how could we know the true intentions of the United States? What is the exact historical truth here? Well, this would depend on who you talk to. In the same way, it is hard to gauge cause and effect for any historical event. In this same way, it is hard to do this. And this makes the why and the how of so many past events such a subjective issue. Now we shift to problems with photographic evidence in interpreting historical evidence. Take, for example, this picture. What is happening in this picture? How many different ways can this picture be interpreted? Well, one that comes to mind is that it can be seen that people are throwing others into the water to drown. Or it could also be seen that people are saving them, these people in the boat are saving the others in the water from drowning. So which interpretation is more right? To try and determine this, we need historical context and reasoning. And even then, based on our own further interpretations, we can still stray from the right answer. So, what else can affect the pursuit of historical truth? For one, how accurately do historians write about history? For instance, consider the first two historians, Herodotus and Thucydides, who wrote about the causes of war. Herodotus, he embellished. He was a storyteller historian, and he included heresy and free will of gods in his writing about the war. Thucydides, on the other hand, was more methodical, focused on political and military influences of the war and what affected human motivation. In the present time, even though storyteller historians may not go as far as Herodotus did, do we stray further from the actual historical truth through the storyteller approach to history, or do we actually get closer? In an attempt to answer this question, perhaps both imagination and factual evidence are required. Being able to visualize and to some extent feel what occurred in the past as a reader of history can significantly aid in understanding and making history more exciting. Fact, however, is still a major requirement for overall accuracy. This is to say that an overall understanding of events may require both aspects of creativity and fact. Here are further attempts at finding an answer to this question. Writing history with too much creativity risks losing the personal connection. We want to learn about the real experiences of others in this subject. However, if history is only written based on strict fact, it risks then quickly becoming bland, and then it too also loses the human factor in it. In the end, some extent of creativity is in fact needed in order to make the reader better understand the condition of humans in the past. For instance, award-winning historian Peter Cochrane says that without historical imagination, history is not much more than a retranscribing of records. Additionally, he says, history has to be vivid, creative, imaginative. It has to squeeze every ounce of historical juice out of the record, and then leave it to the reader and other historians to say if he went too far. It would seem that then a combination of historical imagination and reason based on records is instrumental in the writing of history. Historians can be storytellers, even though some try to split these two areas apart, the telling of history and storytelling. Yet, why do we have to restrict ourselves to just one domain in this sense? Take, for example, Leonardo da Vinci, who was a painter, a sculptor, an architect, a musician, a scientist, mathematician, a geologist, a writer. And this man was so successful in all these areas. Is it really too much to ask? Or too much to imagine historians having both a factual and yet a creative role in telling history? Essentially, overall, historical truth is a term that can sometimes be applied to certain events from the past, such as the dates of a battle or even reasons for the occurrence of the battle. However, as with many other events in history, the why and the how are questions that require interpretation. We try to approximate as closely as possible, through evidence, the exact event, because it itself cannot actually be fully reconstructed as it did in the past. So basically it cannot be recreated completely, exactly the same way as it was. Although the study of history is made to seem objective at times, it is ultimately subjective, as all historians have to choose the evidence they interpret. Why then should we bother studying history at all, if it is so objective? In an attempt to answer this question, perhaps critically analyzing the sources used in history, and in the learning of history, and understanding the historical context of problems are part of history, are part of the subject area, and can also provoke major thought. In the process, we may also learn lessons that can help us in the future. So, what do historical events have that we generally consider as certain to have taken place, such as the Holocaust, for example? What do these events have in terms of evidence that other more uncertain events do not? So here we are looking at gaining historical truth. We are looking at it from almost a different perspective. What is required to be considered a historical fact? We've seen some of the problems with historical truth, rather, but now we are seeing what is necessary to become a historical truth. So using the Holocaust as an example, what is our evidence here? Well, we have millions of dead Jews found in death camps. We have written records from Hitler and the Nazis. We have artifacts, diagrams, and photographs taken by Nazis at concentration camps. So, what seems to be needed to provide strong historical evidence is accurate and complementing testimony from either contending side of a war or any other particular issue. By complementing testimony, I mean that both sides acknowledge the same issue without contradicting one another, and they come to a almost logical conclusion. To illustrate this, I shall use the example of the space race, where many hoax theories were saying that the Americans never did land a man on the moon. However, these theories were largely rebuked because the Soviets never rejected defeat of the Americans in landing a man on the moon, even though they were in the midst of the political and ideological pressures that accompanied the space race. In the end, although absolute historical truth may be elusive for many events in the past, the pursuit of the best approximation of the past drives historians to try to accurately portray the real events of history, and can even drive us to learn about these events through a critical analysis of evidence and historical context. Thank you.